Welcome to Part 10 of Sustainable Finance. My name is Gregor Weiss, and I am a professor of finance here at Leipzig University. This chapter is, in a sense, the engine room of the whole course: carbon finance. Everything we've discussed, green bonds, ESG funds, climate risk, ultimately comes back to one deceptively simple problem. How do you put a price on a ton of carbon dioxide, and how do you use finance to cut emissions? Over the next several videos, we'll see how emissions are measured, how they're priced through taxes and markets, whether carbon risk actually shows up in asset prices, how capital is mobilized for the transition, and finally, how we might pull carbon back out of the atmosphere. It's the most technical chapter in the course, and I think one of the most important. To place us, this is topic 10 of 12, and it pulls together threads from everything before it. The carbon premium we met in part 8 comes back here in depth. The stranded asset risk from banking and insurance returns. The blended finance tools connect to development finance. So think of part 10 not as a new island, but as the place where many of the course's rivers meet. After this, we have just two topics left: financial stability and the regulatory context, and then microfinance. Here's what you should take away. First, understand carbon finance itself, how emissions are measured, priced, and traded. Second, be able to compare the two great instruments for pricing carbon: carbon taxes and emissions trading systems, or cap and trade, and know the European Union's flagship schemes, the ETS, and the new border mechanism, CBAM. Third, assess the evidence on carbon risk in asset prices, the carbon premium, tail risk, and stranded assets. And fourth, know the tools to decarbonize portfolios. From Paris-aligned benchmarks to net zero investing. That's an ambitious list, so we'll build it up piece by piece. 3 questions run through the whole chapter. First, how do we put a price on carbon, and does it actually work? Second, is carbon risk priced in financial markets, or is it mispriced? And third, how can finance be steered toward a net zero economy? Hold on to these, because by the end, you should be able to give a genuinely informed answer to each. Not a slogan, but a nuanced, evidence-based view. Let's begin with part A: carbon finance and accounting. Before we can price or trade emissions, we have to be able to define and measure them. And as we'll see, even the measurement is far harder than it sounds. So what is carbon finance? At its core, it's finance that funds projects which reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But the deeper idea is more elegant. It's finance that funds projects which reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But the deeper idea is more elegant than that. Carbon finance builds financial tools that make emission reductions tradable, that turn a ton of carbon dioxide not emitted into something with a market value that can be bought and sold. And once you can do that, something powerful happens. Even small-scale sustainable projects can finance themselves because the emission reductions they generate become a revenue stream. Strip it all the way down, and the core idea is this: give a commercial value to cutting emissions. If polluting is free, firms will pollute. But if not polluting has a price, markets will start hunting for the cheapest ways to cut. That single move, attaching a price to carbon, is the beating heart of this entire chapter. Carbon finance isn't one instrument, but a toolkit, and here are four of the most important. First, green bonds. Bonds whose proceeds are earmarked for environmental projects, which we studied in part 8. Second, debt for nature swaps, where a portion of a country's debt is forgiven in exchange for commitments to conservation or climate action. Third, guarantees, where a public body absorbs some of the default risk to de-risk a climate investment that private investors would otherwise avoid. And fourth, concessional loans, loans offered on better-than-market terms with longer maturities and lower rates to make green projects viable. Notice the common thread. Most of these tools exist to bridge a gap, to make a project that's good for the planet but marginal for a private investor actually happen. Let's put real examples to those tools because they can feel abstract. A green bond The European Investment Bank issued the world's very first one. Its climate awareness bond back in 2007. The instrument that launched a now trillion-dollar market. A debt for nature swap. In 2023, Ecuador completed a landmark swap worth around $1.6 billion, converting debt into funding to protect the Galapagos Islands. A guarantee. Bodies like the World Bank's political risk arm cover a borrower's default or political risk, so private lenders will step in. And a concessional loan. The Green Climate Fund lends below market rates to make climate projects bankable in poorer countries. These aren't hypotheticals, they're the real plumbing through which climate money actually flows. Now, the single most important scientific fact underlying all of carbon finance: the carbon budget. To limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, the cumulative amount of carbon dioxide we can ever emit is finite. A fixed budget. And according to the IPCC, only around 250 gigatons of carbon dioxide remain in that budget for a 50% chance of staying under 1.5 degrees. At today's emission rates, that's roughly 6 years of emissions. Let that sink in. 6 years. Reaching net zero by around 2050 means balancing whatever residual emissions remain against active removals of carbon from the atmosphere. And here's why this matters for finance. Carbon finance is essentially the machinery for allocating that shrinking budget, for deciding through prices and markets who gets to emit the remaining carbon and at what cost. When the budget is finite and small, every ton becomes precious and pricing it correctly becomes urgent. Finally, before you can price emissions, you have to count them. And the global standard for that is the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which splits a company's emissions into three scopes. Scope 1 is direct emissions from sources the company owns, its own factories, furnaces, and vehicles. Scope 2 is indirect emissions from the energy it buys, the electricity, heat, and steam generated elsewhere, but consumed by the company. And Scope 3 is everything else, all the other emissions up and down the company's value chain, from its suppliers to the use of its products by customers. Here's the crucial, awkward fact. Scope 3 is usually by far the largest, often the great majority of a company's total footprint. And it's also the hardest to measure robustly because it depends on data from hundreds of other firms the company doesn't control. Think of an oil company. Its Scope 1 and 2 emissions from running refineries are dwarfed by the Scope 3 emissions when customers actually burn its fuel. So the biggest, most important part of the footprint is exactly the part we measure worst. That data gap will haunt us throughout this chapter. You cannot price precisely what you cannot measure. Let's recap. Carbon finance is about giving cutting emissions a commercial value through tools like green bonds, debt for nature swaps, guarantees, and concessional loans. It all operates against a hard scientific constraint, a carbon budget of only about 6 years of emissions left for 1.5 degrees. And it rests on carbon accounting, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol's 3 scopes, where the largest emissions, Scope 3, are also the hardest to measure. In the next video, we get to the central question: how do you actually put a price on carbon? Through taxes or through markets like the European Union's emissions trading system? See you there.